Hello, this is Father Rich coming to you from the chapel at Our Lady of Peace for our next segment on how the church has changed the world. And I'm here in front of the beautiful crucifix we have in the chapel. It's wood carved. And some of the words that we use theologically that have been used over time for this moment and what Jesus did for us. One word is salvation, that he saved us. And that's probably the most common and typical word we think of. Some other language of justification. We were justified in our relationship with God, reconciled. But another word that was used from early experience was redemption. And we don't have the same history of that word and really appreciating. Remember back in the day of Jesus, the idea that someone could redeem a prisoner of war or a slave, that you could buy their freedom. And so that's what the church of the language of the church thought of when we thought of what Jesus did for us on the cross. So early on, that word redemption was used theologically in that way. Today's essay is called Mother of Freedom, and really a play on that freedom that Jesus won for us on the cross. And it talks about three different moments in history in the church's kind of dealing with slavery and kind of the human battle with that concept, and finally kind of purging us of that. One, it goes back to a conversation in the 12th century between two men, a hermit and a priest, and which eventually led to them founding a religious order. They felt moved, and one of them saying to literally do what Jesus did for us, for slaves and for prisoners of war specifically. And they would go on to found a religious order. If I can remember their names here. The St. John of Matha and St. Felix of Valios. They would form the Trinitarian order. So that would do exactly that they would seek to accumulate and collect the redemption and free prisoners and slaves. And so you jump ahead 300 years, and then they tell the story of a man that had been in prison for 5 years by the Moors, by the Turks. And he had actually participated. He was a soldier, Spanish, participated in the Battle of Lepanto. Took place in 1575, and a major naval victory for Spain and Christian Spain against kind of the Muslim Turks that were continuing to kind of advance on some of Europe, and certainly that was in the Mediterranean Sea. And eventually the victory would lead to the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary on October 7th each year that commemorates that battle. But this man was taken into prison, and eventually he was freed by a Trinitarian through their efforts. The man was a poet. He had even started writing poetry when he was in the army, but eventually went on to write one of the greatest, and really they say the first modern novel, Don Quixote. The man was Miguel de Cervantes. And he was freed by the Trinitarians in their effort. And he would have a huge influence, really, on literature and writing in the Spanish language, they say, in the same way that William Shakespeare did on the English language. And interestingly enough, they both died on the same day, that we say, but the English and Spanish followed the two different Julian and Gregorian calendars, so they were actually 11 days apart, but the date of their death is considered the same. So we see that. So it's really fascinating to see the connection there. And then they jump ahead to another moment after the Battle of Gettysburg. And a man, his name was John, he was not Catholic nor even really Protestant, but he was a Quaker. And after this, in the midst of the Civil War, he was a poet during the time of the 1860s. So his name was John Greenleaf Whittier. And so in the midst of trying to figure out how to write about the situation, and he was an abolitionist. And so he actually went back to tell the story of St. John of Malta, and a time that a poem about him trying to free slaves years earlier and bringing them back on a boat to Rome. And he writes a poem about the storm that they get through and the hope that St. John had given to those prisoners. And so he uses this Catholic saint and their story and the Trinitarians and what they were doing as a source of hope for the people of America in the 1860s as they were fighting this issue of slavery. And so he goes on to write at the end of the story, at the end of that poem, "Take heart from John de Matha," of course we'd call St. John de Matha, wrote the Quaker poet to his fellow Americans, "So long as your banner is his banner, the prayers of freedom will speed us on, and saints unseen will be pulling at the ropes." That was in the year 1865. Pope Leo XIII would be vocal about continuing to play, the church playing a role in fighting slavery. And at that point, he was after the Emancipation Proclamation. But kind of recognizing the constant role, even though the church gets accused of being silent with slavery at times, and certainly our country and other people of faith, there's a constant movement within the Catholic Church of fighting slavery and helping free slaves and being a part of the Underground Railroad, etc. So certainly that spirit of Don Quixote fighting windmills, fighting for freedom for people, and certainly fighting against slavery, but also fighting for the redemption of prisoners of war. All of that gives us a little taste, but all of that really compared to this redemption, this freedom we talk about, what Jesus gave us on the cross, it pales, because it's that spiritual freedom that opens us to eternity. You could be freed, one day from prison or slavery, and maybe in jail or enslaved the next. I remember working with a young man down at Rockview State Prison, in my first years as a priest. Went down to give a mission down there. We were talking, we were the same age, both came from suburban Pennsylvania, neighborhoods. And he had gotten involved in drugs and eventually was dealing and kind of got sucked into all of that world. And he looked at me and he told me that the 10 years that he had spent in prison were the greatest gift that he had from God. He said in prison, he was able to gain a freedom that he couldn't gain out on the streets of Philadelphia. That's the freedom that we're talking about in Jesus Christ, the freedom this world can't give. So thank you for joining me today. Have a great day. God bless. The name of the article, if I didn't mention it already, was Mother of Freedom, and certainly seeing the ways that church has been a mother for freedom in our world, in our country, throughout our history. Thank you. God bless.